Working Cows Podcast, episode 338. This episode is brought to you by Ranch Right, LLC. This episode is also brought to you by Olson Ranch, LLC.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals Studios. And this episode is brought to you by Ranch Right, LLC.
Does a year's worth of tax prep stand between you and being able to send things to your accountant? Are you tired of email after email asking for documents that you don't know how to find? Are you wondering exactly how much money you're going to owe the IRS this year and have no clue how to even start to figure that out? We've been there, but you don't have to. Hire Ranch Right today and know where your business stands. After all, taxes are a part of life, but Ranch Right helps you with data entry, bookkeeping, gives you reports that you can make sense of, and helps with a realistic outlook of what your business needs this tax season. Visit www.ranchright.llc today and cross tax prep off your list.
Very excited to be joined today once again by Tom Krawiec. He's coming back to talk to us about how he goes about evaluating pasture in a way that gives him real bottom line data that shows him the improvement of his pasture over time, what it actually costs him to have cows out there, and what he's actually getting back out of that exchange. And so just really excited about a practical episode for this. He's going to put on a master class in the first part of this episode talking about just the nuts and bolts numbers that he uses to crunch this data. And then we're going to get into a little bit later in the episode talking about how these things really impact the way that he manages grass. And so really looking forward to this conversation. Tom, thanks again for joining me on the Working Cows Podcast. Good to have you back. Glad it didn't take me as long to get you back this time as it did last time.
Yeah, me too. I'm still not going to date you, though,
right.
Clay.
I'm thankful for that as well. Yeah, we're just past Thanksgiving here, and I'm glad for that too. So,
Cool.
But yeah, you reached out to me and said that you'd come across some or had some interactions recently that revealed to you that maybe there's some room for improvement in the way that we as grass managers, grass farmers, however you want to title yourself, there's maybe some room for improvement in the way that we evaluate pasture and decide, put a number, a value, a dollar amount on the production of grass on our ranches. Is that kind of where you're coming at from this with this discussion?
Very much so, Clay. It's very easy, or not very easy. What I find happens is that we evaluate our pastures subjectively, but it seems like, virtually nobody knows how to do it, in a quantitative fashion, which surprises me, even though holistic management and, Ranch for Profit teach that in the schools. But it's a tool that, I don't know, people aren't doing it in practice.
Could you give me some examples of the subjective metrics that we use?
Well, something that kind of really, I know a lot of people do is they are very happy if they are doing better than their neighbor. The problem with that I see is that if your neighbor is not doing very well, in terms of grass management, that's not a very good metric to use, in my opinion, anyways.
Right.
Because it still doesn't tell us whether we're making enough money off of each acre of land to pay for the mortgage and pay for infrastructure. So I like to go and figure out how much we're harvesting, and then I do one more step and I take it into dollars per acre.
Yep. And again, if we're comparing ourselves with our neighbors and they're not doing well, then they're on a degrading scale. And we're, I mean, they could be going down, but we're still just a little bit better, but we're not going up on our improvement.
Correct.
So that's another reason why we don't want to do that.
Yeah. And, the other thing, I remember going to conferences. Actually, what really piqued my me thinking about this was about a year ago. I go to a conference and the speakers were using pictures of across the fence at their neighbor's place. I find that very disrespectful. Everybody's trying to do the best they can, and to go and put your neighbor down again, I find that very disrespectful, and I don't think it's very useful.
Right.
To tell you the truth.
Yep. And I really appreciated on the first day of the Ranching for Profit school when I went through it. Dallas Mount was my instructor, and he put up a picture of two sides of a fence line, and he said, I want you to looking at this picture, I want you to evaluate these two pastures. Well, one of them, there's a lot of tall grass out there, and it looks pretty good, and then the other one, it's kind of beat down, and it doesn't look as good. But then he takes a picture looking down on both of those,
yeah.
And the one that had all the tall grass also had a lot of bare ground, and the one that was beaten down had no bare ground, and so then it totally shifts your perspective. Like, okay, looking out across the paddock isn't as helpful as looking down on the paddock and looking at the bare ground and seeing, or if there isn't any bare ground, then, that's a better measure of just looking out across it.
Certainly. Yeah.
Yep.
Because we have to, although these steps that I'm going to share with you on how to evaluate pasture, that takes into account leaving lots of litter, because you have to follow those same, the principles of, making sure the ground is covered, that you have no bare ground. And to do that, you have to leave a lot of forage there that needs to get tramped down.
Right.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I appreciate it. And I think that this is a helpful discussion because it's so practical and because we are lagging behind in some regards, like you said, to our grain farmer cousins who are able to tell you what it costs them to produce every acre and what their net profit is on every acre based on this year's prices. And so I think if we can start to shift our thinking to those kind of metrics, it's really going to be helpful in, like you said, making some decisions about our infrastructure investments, about our, just the way we structure our business. Is this a business that can support X number of full-time employees, or is it a side hustle? And so I think those are helpful things.
You bet. And just further past the grain farmers, what about guys that are people that are producing hay? They know how many bales an acre they get. And if they're selling hay, they know how much they sold each bale for. It's pretty simple math.
Yep.
Something that I have found a bit interesting is that I've been getting emails. Actually, people that have listened to me on your podcast have sent me emails, and there are these graziers that have been grazing 6 to 8 years, and they're reaching out because they're not getting the results that they thought they would get. Following the recommendations by many people. And so when what I do is I get them to read the book first, and then we can have a better conversation. And the first thing that we do is, actually just even over text, we go through this technique and through the 5 steps and figure out where they're at. How much are they harvesting? That's a great place to start.
Yep. Very good. And this discussion of figuring out what's available, what we're harvesting, how much it's worth is connected to getting those results in your mind?
Most definitely. Because if you're not getting the results that you want, here's a quantitative answer for, okay, this is what you're harvesting. Okay, if you're not happy with that, now you can start make some decisions and find out what the problem is. But if you're happy with where you're at, then okay, that's fine too. And then you don't have to go down that. Something that I find kind of wherever I go and people I talk to, we kind of give our pastures a buy.
Mm.
So a grain farmer or hay farmer certainly would not, they have a threshold. And if that piece of land is not producing at their threshold, okay, now we got to do something. And they got to figure out, okay, let's get over our threshold. But it seems like we don't do that for our pastures. And we said, oh well, that's all we got this year. And leave it at that.
Right. Yep. In 2019 and 2020, or at least 2019 for sure, the drought of 2019 in my neighborhood, when people started realizing I'm not getting a half a bale to the acre on my land, they went and put the machinery away. They parked all their haying equipment and said it's not worth it to go out there and beat the equipment up, burn the diesel, incur the repairs and all the other maintenance costs, only for whatever it was, whatever their threshold was, right? Quarter bale to the acre, half bale to the acre. So a lot of guys heard it from the neighbors and said, my place looks as bad or worse than yours, so I'm not even going to pull my stuff out of the garage or out of the shop. I'm not even going to go to the hayfield this year. So again, they've got those metrics, they've got those thresholds. Grass farmers need the same ones. And I think if you're ready, I'm ready to jump into that process of determining that.
Okay, let's go. So, I just want to mention again, this is all grain farmers do this sort of thing. And guys producing hay, they do the same thing. So, but before we get going, there's a few terms that we need to know. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're familiar with standard animal unit?
Yep.
Okay. So that's 1,000 pound dry cow. And so then you adjust that based on the class of animal you have. And I get that value. There's a table in the back of the holistic management booklet, aid memoir, and then you adjust it up or down. So 1,000 pound dry pregnant cow is 1.0. So as an example, a 1,350 pound dry pregnant cow has a value of 1.23 standard animal units.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the next term we need to know is stock day. So that's the amount of forage 1,000 pound dry pregnant cow eats in one day. And that's the equivalent of about 24 pounds of dry matter. I kind of, to get my head around it, I kind of think of that as a bushel of grain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the equivalent to a bushel of grain. I just use that as an example to wrap my head around what a one stock day is. And the next term that we need to know is stock days per acre. So that's just the amount of stock days harvested from each acre of land. And it'd be similar to bushels per acre or bales per acre. And then the final term is your custom grazing rate. And that's the average cost to graze an animal unit each day in your area. So it's just wherever you go, rates are going to be different. And if you own your own animals and you graze on your own land, I find it's still a good reference just to determine the expense of that is normally hidden.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Could I make more grazing somebody else's cows?
You bet. Or how much is it costing you to graze your cows?
Right.
Certainly you have your mortgage, but this is more specific. Maybe I want to use that term.
Yeah, I think sometimes that you get into the ranching to break even thing when you are just figuring in, oh, we paid the mortgage, we paid all the bills,
Sure.
we made enough to do this again another year, basically, rather than the ranching for profit. I'm paying myself for the use of my land.
You bet.
So
yeah, exactly the same thing. Yeah, and just a note, I do this at the end of the grazing season because I think how I talk about I graze in the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just keeping it vegetative, and so I'm only clipping it. So I'm only taking maybe 30 to 40% tops of the amount of available forage there. So if you were to do it every time, it kind of skews how much forage is actually there.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Ready to jump in?
Yep. Let's go.
Okay, buddy. You got your calculator?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So step one, the first thing to do is calculate the standard animal units for the entire herd.
Okay.
So for this example, we're going to use 160 pair. And the standard animal unit for one pair, and we're going to assume 1,350 pound cows,
mm-hmm.
is 1.75 standard animal units. So we multiply 160 pair times 1.75 standard animal units, and we get 280 standard animal units.
Mm-hmm.
That's for the herd. Now, I don't adjust this throughout the growing season. And the reason being is, yes, when you start grazing, your young calves are, they're going to be small. So then that 1.75 is pretty high. But then when you're grazing, late fall, those calves are going to be pretty big. And probably that 1.75 is too late.
Right.
So it just balances out. And the objective here is not to be precise. It's just to get you in a ballpark. And really, what I like this technique for is I can compare from one year to the next. Step two. Okay, you need to calculate the graze days for the whole season.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you just have a little, notepad in the back of your pocket, you just jot down how many days that herd was in that paddock. So in this example, we're going to assume that we grazed from June 1st to June 6th, which is 7 days.
Okay.
And then September 1st to September 6th, another 7 days for a total of 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
And now step three, you need to calculate the stock days per acre. So the formula for that is standard animal unit times the graze days divided by the acres in the paddock. And for this example, let's use 50 acres for the paddock size.
Okay.
So we've already calculated 280 standard animal units for the herd.
Mm-hmm.
We multiply that by the 14 days, the total days of grazing.
Yep.
And then we divide that by 50 acres.
Okay.
Which gives us 78 stock days per acre.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, step four, convert the custom grazing rate into dollars per stock day.
Okay.
So I think of it as so many dollars per bushel of grain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And remember, we have to convert that from the animals that you have to that standard animal unit, which is that 1,000-pound dry pregnant cow, which is 1.0. So in this case, we already talked about we're grazing pairs, 1,350-pound cows. Their standard animal unit is 1.75. So you know what? I'm going to use $1.25 per pair per day. Now, I know for your area, that's probably dirt cheap, but in the area of Athabasca, that's right in the ballpark. Maybe some people are getting $1.50, but $1.25. And again, it's just for this example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so $1.25 per pair per day divided by 1.75 standard animal units. That gets us to 71 cents a stock day. You bet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's step 5, and this is where, in my mind, the rubber hits the pavement.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to convert dollars per stock day to dollars per acre.
Mm-hmm.
So we've already determined 71 cents per stock day.
Mm-hmm.
And then we multiply that by the number of stock days per acre, which is 78. And what do we get?
55.38, if you want to be.
You bet. So there we are. That's our gross revenue for that acre of grass.
Mm-hmm.
And just a little point that I like to show my work when I'm doing this, because I make a lot of errors when I'm punching numbers into my calculator.
Mm-hmm.
So when I have that unit behind the number, then I can figure out where I went wrong.
Yeah. Again, appreciate the practicality of it. Appreciate the simplicity of it. All simple math. I'm working on
math.
All this math, homeschooling my 3rd grade son, and it's about the same math. So
yep, you bet.
So it's good, and it's stuff you can turn over to them if you want to and check their work. So, anyways, yeah, I appreciate that. How do you use this? How does it change the way that you conduct business and some of those things?
Well, first off, I want to know if I'm making any money off that grass, like a profit. So if like when I was custom grazing and renting a lot of land, I was paying $30 per acre at that time. So that didn't leave a lot. In that scenario, if I was only getting 78 stock days per acre, that didn't leave a lot. And that number there is very common, somewhere between 70 and 100 stock days per acre over the course of the growing season, or grazing season, I should say. That's a very common number. And people think that they're doing really well at that. It sure changes when we take it down into dollars and cents.
Right, for sure.
Per acre.
How does this change throughout the year? How does this change in the winter and some of those things?
Okay. Well, what I do is, did you happen to notice or remember the little table that I have? That's my grazing summary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I break it down into growing season and dormant season, because in my mind, the dormant season, when you have stockpiled grass, what you're doing is you're just replacing, harvested feed. So instead of feeding, silage or hay, those cattle are grazing. So in Athabasca County, in that area, I just arbitrarily picked November 1st
mm-hmm.
as the day when I switched from growing season to dormant season. Of course, the grass isn't growing at that time, but November 1st, pretty much everybody is feeding at that time.
Right. And then do you change your rate? I mean, just kind of go and find a feedlot rate or a day rate in the winter? Is that because a lot of our cows in our neighborhood are home off of, so the winter rates, I would say, are less accessible in my neighborhood than the summer rates, unless you just went and said, what would it cost me to lock these cows up in a feedlot for the winter, which some people do. So I didn't know if you had a different way of figuring that number out or not.
Basically what I do is I figure out how much, like if I was going to feed the cows, I just calculate how much per day.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty easy number to figure out. So then instead of that 71 cents per stock day, I just plug in how much it would cost per day. And then I convert that to so much per stock day.
Sure.
Basically, I ran through this scenario.
Yeah.
And another way that I like to look at it, and I'm always it's just a quick thing for me when I'm if I see a bush paddock or whatever, if I see some grass, maybe I have to put up a temporary fence or something. I calculate how many days or estimate how many days I could graze there, and if it's worth my effort to put that fence in. So I like to figure out how much it would cost to feed that herd for one day.
Mm-hmm.
So in this scenario, 160 dry cows times 230 a day is $360 a day that I would save for every day of grazing that I can muster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, becomes very, again, practical and something you can see right there as a bottom line. This is a go or a no-go.
But you can see it right there.
Right.
Like I said, it may take some work to throw up polywire, or quick high tensile around a piece of grass. But if you estimate, and if you can get another 8 days of grazing,
mm-hmm. Yep,
it's certainly worth it.
Absolutely. Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today. This episode is brought to you by Olson Ranch, LLC. Wally wants you to know that he's got a marketing school coming up here early in 2024, January 23rd through the 26th in Claremore, Oklahoma. The school is great. It's an opportunity to learn about sale by marketing, an opportunity to learn about managing your cow herd inventory and managing the inventory value, managing cow depreciation, how to find overvalued and undervalued animals, the cost to carry an animal, where to sell and buy, how to sell and buy, all kinds of these things. Just a great opportunity, and really would encourage you to go to Olson Ranch LLC and get signed up for this upcoming class, January 23rd through the 26th in Claremore, Oklahoma, and would recommend that you check out the show notes page for today for that link to olsonranchllc.com. So you mentioned that you do this from year to year. Can you tell me about what that does for you, or how that helps you, or some of the things, the insights that you gain by doing it year over year?
Well, first of all, it tells me where I'm at. It needs, helps me decide, okay, I might need to do something here. Like if I'm if I'm 70 stock days per acre, I need to do something. Okay. In the book, I have this example where we bale grazed, it's one paddock. I remember it clearly because it was just like, that was the first time that I really had numbers from one grazing season. We bale grazed that winter, and then I grazed the next summer. So we were at, I think we were at about 45 stock days per acre. Like it was just overgrazed. It had been, it was just Kentucky bluegrass, maybe a little bit of white clover, maybe some creeping red fescue. That was all that was in that paddock. We bale grazed there. And the next year, we got just shy of 200 stock days per acre. and something, that did not include, I skipped one grazing. Because I didn't have enough cattle, and I need to get as much grass clipped as possible. And I made the decision to skip one grazing in that paddock.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. It's just, it just gives me the tool to say, okay, I need to do something because this isn't working. If I don't do anything, I already know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yep. We've got to do something to improve this, and bale grazing is a tool for doing that.
One tool.
Right.
That's right.
Yep.
And then you can pick out another tool.
How are you using this, beyond kind of what we've talked about, or what other tools are you using for evaluating pasture and kind of helping make some decisions even within the growing season? Is there drought planning and some of those things that are also going into this?
Clay, there's two things that I do not violate, and that is the graze period and the rest period. So in terms of drought planning, my big thing is bush. And I intentionally graze bush later in the fall, or later in the summer, to clear the underbrush out so that grass can grow, so that when there is a drought, there's my reserve, because the grass is going to slow right down to the point where we think that it has gone dormant, but maybe it hasn't gone dormant. Maybe it just needs more recovery. And that's often what happens. And now all I need to do is, okay, we can go to the bush. Even in a drought, there's plenty of grass in the bush if you've intentionally grazed that area to promote grass production.
Sure.
And up to this point, that has worked very well for me. Have not had to destock. And of course, I haven't had long-term drought. I think to tell you the truth, the longest drought that I've dealt with was my first 3 years, 2000, 2001, and 2002. And I remember those years scrambling. I was grazing ditches. I was grazing road allowances, and every piece of bush I could find, I was grazing to extend my recovery time. Does that answer your question?
Yep. For sure. I was just trying to figure out what else here is kind of things that people definitely need to know or need to consider when they're thinking about using this tool and ways that it's helped you over the years, I guess.
Okay, and one thing, in my opinion, production is the first thing that we should be evaluating. I know I may get some flack from people. We should be looking at the soil. We should be looking at the bugs and stuff. But in my opinion, if we can get some grass growing, a lot of those problems that we have, they get rectified. They get fixed. Yep. I remember reading in the Stockman Grass Farmer, this would have been in, I want to say 2006, maybe 2005, an article that Ellen Nation wrote about organic dairy farmer, grass-based dairy farmer in Ireland. And what that fellow said, when he takes over a new dairy, the first thing he does is whatever needs to be done, he gets grass growing. That is his first priority. Once he gets that going, now let's look at organic. And that's the way I see it too. Like I said, when I'm able to get lots of grass growing, a lot of those problems get taken care of. You get lots of ground cover. You get great aeration, which increases or improves the water cycle. And your animals do better.
And I think that a lot of times we get hung up on these things, and I'll be the first to tell you my favorite day of the Ranching for Profit School was the day that was spent on ecology. But we get hung up on those things, and we start to look at those things, and then we're not evaluating the bottom line, and it comes time to write the check at the end of the year, and you're like, there really isn't that much left over here. And so it becomes harder, because we're not focused on production first. And production is really the bottom line. That's what's going to determine how much.
The driver.
Right. How much are we able to do here? I think another benefit of that is that agriculture has become very production focused. And so if we are speaking in those terms translate a lot easier to the way that people are used to having these conversations in agriculture these days. Whereas when we just go off the deep end into microbiology and water cycles and, all these other things, people are maybe less likely to connect to that conversation and see the value of it. When we're talking bottom line dollars and cents, people understand those terms a lot more readily or a lot more quickly.
That's very astute, Clay. I didn't know you were so smart. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, it's very, like you said, it's quantitative, not the qualitative, the subjective metrics that we've been using.
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to make just back up a little bit. You were saying we get caught up in things. A lot of times we get these blinders. We know so much about the biology. We know our soil types. So then, like I remember at a place, the owner knew the place. It was amazing what they knew about their place, because they had experts come out and they had it was just amazing. But it was crappy production. And that crappy production was blamed on because it was sandy soil. And it wasn't sandy soil. I remember, so I think it was the second season I was there. Yeah, there was this area that, what the heck? There's just this beautiful stand of grass. And it was only in one little piece of the paddock. The rest of the paddock was crap. But there was all this grass. And I was thinking, what the heck happened there? And then I remember over the winter when I think I strip grazed that paddock. The cows came back, and that's where they ruminated. I have no idea why they picked that spot, but that was the spot. And then, you know what? I would say there was probably a 5 to 6 fold increase. That's how much of an increase. And all that it took was those animals ruminating there. So what I realized was that if the sand wasn't the issue, plant nutrition was the issue there.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that is big with the bale grazing, Steve Kenyon talks about this a lot. Yes, you get all those nutrients, but you get a lot of ground cover. You get a lot of litter. And I think that's, in my experience anyways, that's as important as nutrition for the plants. We got to get that ground covered.
Yeah.
But if you have, if you're hooked or stuck on something that's not really the issue, and we get blinders on, then we don't open our mind. But boy, when you get down to the point where you're only making $40 an acre, or $70 an acre, okay, now it's time to look at things and what's the issue here.
Right. And how do you determine that baseline? I mean, you've got other things that are pulling for those dollars, and so you just kind of look at what's left over after everything's paid, or are there some benchmarks that you like to look at from maybe extension services or anything like that as far as determining that baseline for productivity and what does make sense, or where that red line is where I need to make a change here?
Are you baiting me here?
No, I don't think so. Not that I know of.
Okay. I have a feeling you're asking me about the tipping point.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking me about?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to talk about that because it is I already pushed the envelope pretty far already. And the tipping point is, in my experience, there's this point where there is enough biomass. So that's above ground and below ground, that the system becomes self-propagating. So we have a nice thatch layer. We've on top, we've built a home for the biology, for the soil biology. Steve talks about you got to build a roof, Well, a home, you got to have a roof.
Mhm.
You have to have good aeration, good water cycle, and the animals have to be fed. And so when you have plants that are in the vegetative state, they continually release exudates for the soil biology. And in my mind, we have to somehow get to that tipping point as fast as we can. Because if we don't, we're going to stay stagnant. Yes, we may be doing 3 times better than our neighbors. But if our neighbors are only doing, maybe 20 stock days per acre, and we're doing 80 or 90 or 100, I showed you an example. It's still not enough to raise our family.
Mm-hmm.
It's different if you don't have mortgage payment. That takes a lot of pressure off. But you can stay stagnant there. And it just seems like there's just not enough energy in the system to tip it so that it becomes a self-propagating system.
Yep.
So I'm going to go out on not on a limb, but I'm going to share some actual numbers with you.
Sure.
From my experience and where I've grazed. That tipping point is approximately 175 stock days per acre.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's my metric. That's my benchmark. Somehow I have to get there. And then what I have found consistently, once I hit that 175 stock days per acre, in 2 to 3 years, I'm at 300 plus.
And it's, just the nature of all of these systems getting back into balance. They start to do what they were designed to do, and the production continues to increase over time.
That's what I'm finding.
Right.
Yeah.
Matching your management to nature's design.
Okay. Maybe. I don't know.
Or however you want to say it, but that you're not taking more than you need. You're leaving behind adequate, residue and all those things. You're not, like you said, you're not not violating the recovery period, not violating the graze period, so all those things is what I mean by matching your management to nature's design. That's what I meant.
Okay. Well, then you're correct. I know I've been challenged on that number by many people, and I haven't grazed every place.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that every ranch that I've gone to, there is someplace on that ranch where you go, holy crap, there's a beautiful grass here. I remember I was looking at leasing a ranch in Saskatchewan, southern Saskatchewan. And so they had all the pictures and stuff. I never actually went out to have a look at it, but the pastures were not very good. And then there's pictures of the infrastructure. And so I'm just flicking through these pictures, and around the corrals, like on the outside of the corrals, and you should have seen the grass clay. Like, this is southern Saskatchewan. There should not be grass like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that told me it is not a water issue.
Mm.
It's a nutrition issue.
Right.
But if we're looking at a water issue, then we kind of put our hands up. Well, it doesn't rain enough.
Right.
I can guarantee you around those corrals, it was not raining. Any more than other places. I remember being at working at a ranch where they had lots of irrigation, and so this one place they had a big pivot, and it was improved pasture. So I think they seeded it down to hay, but we grazed it as well. And at the fence, right across the fence, hardly anything grew. It was like semi-arid desert. And they told me, well, yeah, out on the range, things don't grow because it's just too dry. And so one day I'm just riding around and I'm watching that end gun on the pivot. Well, it shot 15 to 20 feet across the fence into that area that had no grass. It was getting that for like 19 years. I think that's how long they had that pivot. There's no grass there. So again, here we put on our blinders because we're told, well, it's too dry, but that was not the issue. So we stopped looking for the actual problem because we think that what we think is the problem is not the actual problem.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it becomes an excuse that we use to let ourselves off the hook, to put it bluntly, right? It doesn't rain here, so that won't work here.
Well, that's rude to say it like that. I like to say that we have blinders on by accident. And so then we're not able to look at the real underlying, I'm teasing, you know that,
right.
The underlying reason of why we'll have what we have.
Right. We didn't put Steve Kenyon's disclaimer up at the beginning of this episode that this talk will offend you. We didn't have it in a big red slide at the beginning of our talk, so we can't be offensive. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I usually have a disclaimer. 83% of all statistics are made up on the spot. And not everything that you hear and read from me is 100% accurate.
Very good. So we started this with our walking through the 5 steps, and when we got to the end of that, we had 78 stock days per acre. And you're saying that the tipping point is at 175 stock days per acre, and in 2 to 3 years, in your experience, in your zip code, that'll be up to 325. So you're talking about if we can double our current stock days per acre, a little more than double our current stock days per acre, eventually it'll quadruple. So the keys to doing that, the keys to doubling that stock days per acre are the grazing principles, graze period, recovery period, stock density, all those things. Is that kind of have those been your guiding principles in getting those stock days per acre to continue to increase over time?
Yes. And the first thing that, in my opinion, the first thing a person needs to do is get their grazing under control. And that is, just like you said, don't violate the graze period and don't violate the recovery period. Mm-hmm. And once you do that and get a handle for that, or with that, then you can evaluate where you're at.
Right.
And, okay, do we need to do something? I really like ammonium sulfate. I do know a guy in Manitoba, he's starting to use elemental sulfate and sounds like getting the same results that I've got with ammonium sulfate. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's just a one-time deal. That's just to get you to the tipping point.
Get you over the hump.
But the first thing is get your grazing under control. And unfortunately, it takes 2 to 3 years to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the graze period and the rest period, don't stay too long, don't take too much, and don't come back too soon. Those are different ways of saying the same thing. Right? Graze period is about not staying too long or taking too much. Recovery period is about not coming back too soon to that same place.
Okay. Yeah. The graze period, I want to be more precise on that, mm-hmm. Just for myself. It's just not staying too long. Mm-hmm. Because if you're taking too much, that's a different issue. You're overstocked.
Right. Sure.
That's a different issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to make, I'm in the process of making a couple videos. One is how to determine your graze period, the way that I do it. Mm-hmm. If you remember,
yep,
Yeah, way back, I think it was 2003. By accident, I stumbled on that technique that I use. It's
Right.
the strip grazing where the cattle walk back to water. It has really worked very well. And and then to figure out the recovery period, I stumbled onto that the magic of 13 paddocks. And I just plugged that graze period in to the 13 paddock formula that holistic management teaches, and that's my recovery period.
Yep.
And it's a hard thing for people to get around when they're thinking that these long recovery periods, what I call long recovery periods, it's a tough mental thing. And to tell you the truth, the only people that have been game to try this that I've talked to so far have been the people that have been grazing for 6 to 8 years. And they realize they're not getting the results they want. And interestingly, that was the same length of time that I started to realize. I started to realize it in year 5, and then year 6, and then really year 7, I realized I'm not improving the soil. All I'm doing is I've gotten organized, and yes, I'm doing significantly better than everyone around me, but it's a better utilization. I'm not improving the soil.
Right. So what changed from year 6 to year 7? I mean, what were some of the practical things you did differently? Or maybe it's a continuum and you're continuing to tweak and improve. But I mean, you said I started to realize in year 5, year 6, I realized it, confirmed, and then year 7, we made a change.
Well, I didn't. I guess what I really did was definitely by year 8, I challenged myself. I have to figure this out because you know what? At that time, I was writing articles and I had some speaking engagements, and I realized I was being a farce. Maybe not farce is not the right word, but I knew that what I was saying was not really true. I was regurgitating, what I had been taught that, this is what you should expect. And so I stopped all that. In fact, I even stopped reading. And I just stayed on the ranch and I figured it out. And that's when I stumbled on the sweet spot. And to me, that was just huge for me and really changed things in my grazing and really helped me improve the pastures. Of course, I did do an experiment with ammonium sulfate that I was very embarrassed about using fertilizer because, I came from holistic management and that's a no-no. And so I never even told Steve, and we're buddies, and I never told him. I just like, oh, how you doing, Steve? I never told him, but I've seen the results with it. And then, of course, bale grazing. Well, that's a no-brainer. The only problem with the bale grazing is that you can't get around. You can't improve much ground. Like Steve and I did a calculation, and so we used 100 cow. Did he talk to you about this?
No, but I know what you're saying, and I've experienced it myself. Bale grazing is the fastest way to improve land, but it's also the slowest way to improve land. It's the fastest way to improve really small areas and then move over and improve another really small area. And it takes a long time to cover a whole place doing it.
100 cows, stock or bale grazing, the way that Steve and I prescribe, 14 acres a year.
Right.
Now that's pretty huge, because you go from, I have that example. I went from 46 to 200 plus stock days an acre the next season, right after the bale grazing. So that's pretty impressive. But again, it is a small acreage that you can improve.
Right. Yep.
And so then, I have those two tools, and I have noticed that there's I have not been using ultra high stock density. I played around with it for different things, like for brushing, clearing land. I have used it for that, but I had this one situation where I didn't have the cattle trained yet to move very well when just the way that I like them to move. And we had to go around across this little causeway, kind of through a swamp, and then to the other side, and then over to the other paddocks and young calves. So it was a tricky situation, and it took me basically 2 days to get, and there's only like maybe 200, 250 calf pairs in that group. But what happened was later that summer, there's all this grass in that area. And I'm thinking, it was kind of like a half moon. What the heck? And then I realized I was moving those cows back and forth because they had missed the gate. And so then I'd have to zip around, just gently bring them back. And I did that for 2 days. And so I don't know if it was the extra nutrition to the soil, through the urine and the dung, or if it was just the hoof action, or was it a combination of both? But since then, I've realized, you know what, maybe I need to go, maybe I don't need the ammonium sulfate as much as I think I do. And maybe I just need to be a little more intentional about getting this animal impact, ultra high animal impact. I still don't think that it's a method of grazing, like a grazing system, but it's a tool in my toolbox. And maybe in that situation, I didn't pull it out.
Yeah.
I've only been using that for, like I said, for clearing.
Yeah.
Clearing brush.
I think ultra high density grazing is real. I think it works. But I think the challenge with it is that it's incredibly labor intensive. And when labor is your highest cost in much of the working cows listening area, it becomes cost prohibitive to do that, if that makes any sense.
It does, but I want to throw this out, Clay. I want to see the numbers.
Right.
So this week here, I have actually the article that I sent you that will be coming out in Stockman Grass Farmer, that very article. And what's the title of that article?
Yeah. Show me the numbers.
Show me the numbers. Nobody does that.
Right.
You go to a conference. I have not been to a conference where I've heard the numbers on grazing. I've heard the numbers on, how many bushels per acre, with the guys that do the polyculture, but I have not heard the numbers. And when I talk to people, it's very difficult to get the numbers. And what I'm finding is that people don't know the numbers. They don't know how to calculate it, which is a big driver for this article. I remember, because I'm always looking at ways to improve pastures. So when I hear someone has amazing results, I go down that rabbit hole. I go to the original research, or I track down the actual producer. And when I track down the actual producer, I have to keep asking more and more questions, one after another, to get, so I can get numbers so that I can put them into and do this steps 1 to 5. But it seems like people don't know how to do this, and it's simple math. And I think it's easy to get hung up on things that I'm going to say that are not important, but it's very dangerous to say that. I better say things of less priority. How's that?
Yep. I think that ultimately it's definitely possible to improve land and go broke doing it.
Most definitely.
You know what I'm saying? If we're not looking at the bottom line, and we're not looking at what do I actually make per acre on this land, as you've shown us how to do today, we could be improving land and getting better in a lot of these areas, but go broke doing it. Not make enough money in the interim to pay all the bills and keep everybody happy while we're all doing this.
Exactly. And that's something, Clay, that I did not do. It took me too long to do that because I didn't want to spend money. I actually, at that time, I did not have the tools. I did not have these steps, even though I was taught that in both holistic management and ranching for profit. I guess I'm a slow learner. But maybe it was the last step that I didn't really know how to do and put it into dollars per acre. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I was scared of, even after I did put it into dollars per acre, I didn't know what, if I spent this money on that paddock, what would my benefit be? Mm-hmm. I didn't have those numbers. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's cool, where you have your paddocks. Okay, don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. If there's something that sounds like, I think this might work, try it on that one paddock.
Right.
And then as long as you have your numbers, as long as you have your base numbers where you started at, then you can see what kind of improvement you had. But if you don't know where you started, it's subjective. Mm-hmm. And then you can't pencil out, should I be doing this on the rest of the property?
I really appreciate it. It's good stuff. Again, practical. I've said that many times today. Appreciate that. And so where should we send people to get the book? They can find the article in the Stockman Grass Farmer in the December issue?
Yes. And then I just submitted, I think last week, I submitted kind of a follow-up article. Mm-hmm. But I got chastised because they said it was too long. So they're going to break it up into two. And in the follow-up article, I talk about the sweet spot and I talk about the tipping point, and I provide research that is pointing in that direction. Because again, we've talked about it before and you've read the book. For me, the sweet spot, I think that's the key that we're missing. And the problem with that is there's no research to back me up. There's just lots of, I have my production records, but I'm just some dumb rancher that has production records, and there's no scientific research to back me up. But boy, is there a pile of research pointing in that direction. So in the follow-up articles, I have the research that points in that direction. And basically all I've been doing with reading all this research is just finding out if there's support for what I've been doing for the last 20 plus years.
Successfully.
Yeah, which is nice.
Right. So where should we send people to get the book after they've read the article?
Okay. Well, my webpage is simplyranching.ca. And I just started a Instagram page, and there is a Facebook page that's coming, and then you can buy a PDF version off that page directly from there. Mm-hmm. I'm actually in the process of recording a audio book, so that will be, once I finally get that done, that will be on those two platforms.
Very good. We will have links to all that we can in the show notes page. Go ahead.
I should mention, yes, you can buy it on Amazon, and 70% of the purchases are off Amazon. But just know that I make half of the book that you purchase off of Amazon compared to what you get off my webpage.
Sure.
Boo-hoo.
Yep. We want more of that money in your pocket.
Me too.
Yep.
Me too.
So
Cool.
Sounds good. Tom, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you again for joining me.
Hey, you're getting really good at this, Clay.
300 episodes in, we're figuring it out.
Ciao, ciao.
As always, very good stuff, very practical stuff there with Tom Krawiec. Really appreciate him. Once again, taking the time, really encourage you to check out his book, Ranching Like a 12-Year-Old. Again, linked in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/338. Really looking forward to sharing with you a conversation with Jeff Mundell coming up next week on the Working Cows podcast. And we're going to talk to him about how stockmanship is impacted by an older style of horsemanship. This is kind of a follow-up to an episode I did with Buck Brannaman, and we're going to talk about the Buckaroo Traditions roping that took place here recently in Winnemucca, Nevada, and about the future of that event, but also just about how those kind of events really do translate well into the pasture and the lifestyle that goes along with them. So really, just those kind of conversations are among my favorite to have, and I really look forward to sharing this episode with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.